The wind screamed across the white desert of ice, carrying snow like sharp blades. It was the kind of storm that swallowed voices and buried lives. And in that storm, two small figures struggled to survive. The alien sisters were young, their skin marked with faint glowing lines that flickered weakly in the darkness. They had been walking for days with no food and no shelter. Their village had cast them out. Their people had called them cursed. Now the storm had found them, and it wanted to finish what cruelty had begun. They huddled close together, their arms wrapped around each other. But the cold slipped into their bones like poison. The snow piled higher, pressing down on their bodies. Soon their weak cries became whispers, and soon even those whispers began to fade. One sister tried to keep her eyes open, her voice shaking. "Don't sleep," she begged the other. "If we sleep, we won't wake again." But her own eyelids felt heavy, and the storm was a lullaby of death. Silence grew, heavy and endless. The sisters thought no one would hear them. No one would find them, no one would care. But fate had other plans. Far away, a human man pushed through the storm. His coat torn and his face marked by the icy wind. He was just a farmer, living on the edge of the frozen frontier. He had gone out to gather wood before the storm swallowed the forest completely. His boots crunched against the deep snow, each step harder than the last. Then he stopped, his head tilting. Beneath the scream of the storm, he heard something faint, a sound that did not belong to the wind. He waited, and there it was again, a cry, weak and broken, almost lost in the storm. His heart pounded. He could have turned back. No one would blame him for running home, but instead, he dropped his bundle of wood and forced himself toward the sound. The snow grew deeper as he climbed a drift, his hands frozen and raw. Then he saw it, a small hand reaching out of the snow, trembling weakly before sinking back into the white. He threw himself to his knees, clawing at the snow with bare hands. The ice cut his skin, but he didn't care. His breath came in heavy clouds. His muscles screamed, but he dug harder and harder. Finally, he uncovered the faces. Two alien girls, their skin pale blue, their lips shaking, their eyes half closed. He gasped. They were still alive, but barely. "Hold on," he shouted through the storm, his voice fierce. "Don't you give up now." He lifted the first girl into his arms, her body light as a feather. Then he reached for the second, his knees shaking under the weight, but he refused to let go. The storm tried to tear them from his grasp, but he bent his head against it step after step. The snow tried to drag him down, his boots sank deep, his chest burned. But he carried them, his cabin was far, too far. But he did not stop. Every time he stumbled, he forced himself up again. The girls' breaths were shallow, their lives slipping away like candle flames in the wind. He could not let the storm take them. At last, the dark outline of his cabin appeared through the white wall of snow. Smoke still curled weakly from the chimney. He kicked the door open and staggered inside, collapsing to his knees. The warmth of the fire touched their frozen skin. He laid them gently by the hearth, wrapping them in every blanket he had. His hands shook as he placed logs onto the fire, making the flames roar higher. The sisters did not wake, their bodies still shivering violently. He rushed to heat water to make broth to save them in any way he could. His heart raced. He had found them. But would it be enough? He knelt by their side, brushing the snow from their hair, watching their faint glowing lines flicker like dying stars. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Not tonight. Not while I'm here." The storm raged outside. But inside the cabin, a battle had begun, a battle against death itself. The human farmer did not know who these alien girls were. He did not know why they were out in the storm. But he knew one thing. He would not let them die. Not while he had breath left in his body. And so, in the frozen silence of that night, something began, not just a rescue, not just survival, but the first spark of a bond that would change all three lives forever. The storm outside roared like a beast. The cabin walls shook with the force of the wind. Snow slammed against the wood again and again, but inside the small home, the human farmer fought a quieter battle, one that mattered more than his own life. The alien sisters lay near the fire, wrapped in every blanket he owned. Their glowing markings flickered weakly under the cloth. Their breaths were shallow, thin streams of air that sounded like whispers. The human's hands trembled as he worked. He poured hot water into a cup, mixing it with dried herbs and a little broth. Then he held the cup to the lips of the older sister. "Drink," he urged softly, his voice rough but gentle. At first she didn't move, her lips pale and frozen. Then with effort she swallowed a drop. Relief spread through him, but it was not enough. He turned to the younger one, brushing the frost from her hair. Her small body shook with violent chills. His heart clenched. He knew if the night went wrong, She would not see the dawn. He pulled another log from the stack and shoved it into the flames. The fire hissed and crackled. Heat washed across the cabin. He stripped off his own coat, draping it over them, then sat close to keep their bodies shielded. Hours passed, every second heavy. The storm screamed louder. But inside the man whispered again and again, "Stay alive, don't give up. Stay alive." His voice was the only anchor in the sea of noise. The sisters stirred faintly, their eyelids fluttering. The older one opened her eyes for a moment, glowing faint green in the firelight. She looked at the human, and fear flickered in her gaze. She tried to move away, but she was too weak. "I won't hurt you," the man said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here, I promise," his voice cracked. And for a moment he wondered if she even understood his words. The older sister coughed weakly, a sound like breaking ice, then whispered something in her alien tongue. The younger one twitched at the sound, but did not wake. The human leaned closer, even though he could not understand her. He recognized the tone. Fear, mistrust, a heart too used to pain. He felt anger stir inside him, not at the girls, but at the world that had done this to them. Children should not know the taste of death. They should not lie in the snow waiting to be buried by silence. He forced himself to breathe slow, to steady his shaking hands. Then he fed the fire again, spooning broth carefully into their mouths whenever they could swallow. He worked like a soldier fighting a battle. Every small victory mattered. Every tiny breath kept them alive a little longer. As the night dragged on, exhaustion weighed heavy on him. His eyelids burned, his muscles screamed for rest. But he dared not sleep if he closed his eyes even for a moment. The fire might die, their breath might stop. He leaned against the wall, forcing himself to stay awake, whispering to them, "Hold on, you're not alone anymore." By dawn, the storm had not ended, but it weakened. The screaming winds turned into heavy moans. The snow fell softer. Light crept into the cabin through the cracks. Inside, the sisters breathed more steadily, their bodies still weak but no longer fading. The human let out a long breath, one he had been holding for hours. His chest ached, but relief warmed him more than the fire. He looked at the girls, fragile yet alive, and whispered, "You fought and you won." But then a question burned in his mind. Who were they? Why were they out there in the storm? And why had no one searched for them? As if hearing his thoughts, the older sister stirred again, her lips parting as she whispered in broken words. The human leaned closer, his heart pounding. She spoke slowly, each word like a blade through the silence. "We were left. No home. No one wanted us." His jaw tightened, fury rising like fire in his chest. "Abandoned, left to die." The words echoed in his mind. He had known hardship. He had known loneliness. But to leave children in the storm, that was cruelty he could never forgive. He reached out, gently brushing the frost that still clung to her hair. She flinched but did not pull away. "Not anymore," he said softly, his voice steady and full of promise. "You're safe here now." The younger sister stirred at last, her eyes fluttering open, glowing faint blue like stars. She looked at him with confusion, then turned to her sister, whispering weakly, "Are we alive?" The older one nodded slowly, her voice breaking. Because of him, the human swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He had not saved them for thanks. He had not saved them for glory. He had saved them because no one else would. And now, looking at their fragile faces, he realized something. He could not let them go. Outside, the storm still covered the world in endless white. But inside that cabin, warmth returned, not just from the fire, but from something far stronger. A fragile bond had formed in the middle of the blizzard, and though none of them knew it yet, that bond would carry them further than any storm ever could. The storm had begun to fade, but the cold still ruled the land. The cabin was a fragile island in a sea of white silence. Inside, the fire burned steadily, its orange light painting the walls with shadows. It was the only barrier between life and death. The human farmer sat close to the flames, his back aching, his hands raw from digging, but his eyes stayed fixed on the alien sisters. They lay bundled in blankets, their bodies trembling less than before, their glowing lines pulsing faintly under the cloth. He stirred the pot above the fire, the smell of broth filling the room. It was a thin meal, just roots, dried meat, and water, but it was warmth, it was life. He scooped some into a cup and leaned over the older sister. "Drink," he whispered again. This time she obeyed, her lips parted, and she swallowed slowly. The human watched every drop disappear, hope growing in his chest. When she finished, he gave the rest to the younger one. her small hands weak but steady enough to hold the cup for a moment. They coughed, they shook, but they lived. And with each breath they pulled back from the edge of the frozen abyss. When the human sat back, exhaustion pulled at him like chains. He wanted to sleep, to collapse, but every time his eyelids drooped, the image of their faces buried in the snow returned. That memory burned away his fatigue. The older sister opened her eyes. Faint but alert, she studied him carefully, her gaze suspicious, her voice soft. "Why?" she asked in broken words, her tongue struggling with his language. "Why save us?" The question struck him harder than the wind outside. He frowned, then spoke slowly. "Because no one else did." His voice carried weight, a truth carved into every scar on his hands. She blinked, her expression unreadable. The younger one stirred and pressed closer to her sister, her tiny fingers gripping the blanket tight. She whispered something in her own tongue. The human could not understand, but the tone was clear, fear and confusion. He felt his chest tighten. How long had they lived like this? How many times had they been left behind? He wanted to ask, but he held his tongue. They were alive now, and that was enough. The fire crackled, the warmth filled the room. Slowly, the sisters' breaths grew deeper, their glowing lines stronger. The human leaned back against the wall, finally allowing himself to close his eyes for a moment. But sleep did not come easy, even in the safety of his cabin. He could hear the storm outside, like whispers of the dead clawing at the windows. He opened his eyes again, staring at the ceiling beams, his heart heavy with questions. He had lived alone for years, far from the villages, far from the noise of others. He had chosen silence, but tonight the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of fragile breaths, breaths that depended on him. As dawn broke, light spilled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Touching the sisters' faces, the human sat up, studying them. The younger one had curled against her sister, her face calm for the first time since he had found her. The older one blinked awake and looked around. She did not smile, but she did not turn away either. Her gaze lingered on him. As if weighing his soul, finally she spoke, her voice rough. "You?" "Not like others," he raised an eyebrow. "Others?" he asked, leaning forward, her lips trembled. She hesitated, then whispered, "They left us." Her voice cracked like ice breaking on a river. "No family, no home, no food. Nothing." The words pierced him deeper than the cold ever could. He clenched his fists. Anger burning, not at her, not at her sister, but at a world that would abandon its own children to the snow. He leaned closer, his voice steady. "Then this is your home now." The words came out before he could stop them. They hung in the air, heavy and real. The sisters looked at him, surprise flickering in their glowing eyes. The younger one whispered something to her sister, confusion mixed with fragile hope. The older one's eyes softened, just for a heartbeat before she turned away. The human knew trust would not come easily, not after what they had suffered, but he was patient. He had lived long enough in silence to know the value of time. He would wait. He would prove himself not with words, but with actions. That night, as the fire burned again, the sisters sat a little closer to the flames, their shoulders brushing against his arm as if by accident. The human said nothing. He only fed the fire, making sure it never died. The blizzard had buried the land in white. But inside that small cabin, something else had been born, not just survival, but the faint beginnings of trust. And though none of them could see the future, deep inside, the fire that saved them was not just the one in the hearth, it was the one beginning to burn in their hearts, a fire that no storm could ever put out. The storm outside had not yet ended. The snow piled higher against the walls of the cabin. The world beyond was a prison of ice, but inside, the fire gave warmth, and for the first time in many days, the alien sisters had a chance to breathe. The human farmer moved quietly around the room, stirring the pot of broth, adding more wood to the fire, and checking on the girls. Every motion was careful, steady, as if he feared one wrong step would send them back into the arms of death. The older sister sat upright now, still wrapped in heavy blankets, her glowing markings stronger than before. She watched him with cautious eyes, her body tense as if ready to flee. Though her legs trembled with weakness, she whispered to her sister in their alien tongue. The younger one's faint laughter broke through the heavy silence, a sound so soft it nearly made the human's heart stop. He froze by the fire, listening. The laughter faded quickly, replaced by a look of shame on the younger one's face. As if joy was forbidden, the human turned and smiled gently. "It's all right," he said, his voice low. "You don't need to hide your laughter here." The sisters exchanged a look, confusion flickering in their eyes. It was as if the idea of safety itself was a strange thing. The hours passed. The wind howled against the cabin. Rattling the shutters, shadows danced across the wooden walls. The sisters huddled closer together. Every creak of the roof made them flinch, their fear carved deep into their bones. The human noticed, he sighed and sat down closer, his presence steady like the fire. "This storm will pass," he said softly. "Storms always do." His words carried a calm strength, a promise that not all darkness lasted forever. The older sister studied him. Her glowing eyes narrowed. "Why?" she asked again. The same question as before. "Why you care?" The man looked into the fire. The flames reflected in his tired eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone," he answered, his voice low, heavy with memory. "And I know what it feels like when someone decides to care anyway." Silence filled the room. The fire crackled. The storm roared, but between them, the words hung like a fragile bridge. The younger sister leaned against her sister's shoulder, her small voice breaking the quiet. "He saved us," she whispered, her alien accent thick but clear. Maybe he is not like them." The older one closed her eyes. Torn between fear and hope, she wanted to believe. But trust was a dangerous thing. Trust had always been punished later when night fell. The human placed more wood on the fire and checked their blankets again. "Sleep," he said. "I'll keep the fire burning." His words were steady, a vow carried in the smoke. The sisters lay down, their bodies still weak, their eyes heavy. But as the fire glowed warm, the younger sister's voice drifted into the darkness, soft and trembling. "Sister, do you think he means it?" The older one did not answer at once, her heart torn, but then she whispered back, "I don't know. But for now we live." The human lay awake against the wall, listening, his eyes fixed on the fire, his chest heavy. He had not asked for this responsibility, but it had found him, and now in this darkness, he swore silently he would not fail them. The storm raged through the night, but the cabin became something else, a fragile shelter where hope was being born. When dawn returned, the world outside was buried deeper than before. Snow stretched endless, but inside, the sisters sat a little closer to the man as he prepared the morning broth. The older one still tense, still guarded, but she no longer looked at him with only suspicion. Trust had not been given, not yet. But something small had changed, like a single flame refusing to die in the cold. The human knew it would take time. He did not expect gratitude. He did not expect trust. But as long as he could keep them safe, as long as he could give them warmth, he would wait. For in the darkness of the storm, trust was not given by words, but by the steady fire, by the small kindnesses, by the choice to stay when everyone else had left. And though the storm had not ended inside that cabin, the first cracks in their fear had begun to appear, letting in a light that could not be taken away. The storm had passed, but the land outside the cabin was no less cruel. Snow stretched across the horizon, burying trees, rivers, and roads. It was a silent graveyard of white. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, its warmth now steady. The alien sisters were stronger, though their bodies still trembled with weakness. The human farmer watched them as he mended a torn boot by the fire, his hands moving slowly, his thoughts heavy. He knew they had survived the storm, but survival was only the beginning. The real storm lived in their hearts, in the memories that haunted their glowing eyes. The younger sister broke the silence first, her voice small. "Will we go back?" she asked, her accent thick, her words broken, but her meaning clear. The older sister turned sharply, her eyes filled with fear. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We cannot." The human set his tools down, his gaze sharpening. "Why not?" he asked gently, his tone soft but firm. The question had burned in his chest for days. Now he needed answers. The older sister's lips trembled. Her fingers clenched the blanket around her shoulders. She lowered her head and spoke in broken phrases. "Our people, they said we are cursed. They cast us out, no food, no family, only the ice." Her voice cracked with pain. "They left us to die." The human's jaw tightened, anger burned through him like fire. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The thought of anyone leaving children to freeze in the snow made his stomach twist. The younger sister pressed close to her sister, whispering, "They said we are a burden." Her voice shook as if the words still carried the weight of the cruelty. "They laughed when we cried." Tears welled in her glowing eyes, and she turned away, ashamed to be seen crying. The human rose to his feet, pacing the cabin, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. He had known hardship. He had seen neighbors turn their backs on each other when times grew hard. But this was beyond cruelty. This was a crime against life itself. He stopped by the fire, staring into the flames. "You're not cursed," he said firmly, his voice sharp as a blade. "You're alive. And that means you matter." The sisters looked at him, surprise flashing in their faces as if no one had ever spoken such words to them before. The older sister swallowed hard, her voice soft. "Why do you care?" The man turned, his eyes filled with a fire stronger than the hearth. "Because someone should," he said. "And if the world has forgotten you, then I will not." The cabin fell into silence again. But it was a different silence, no longer heavy with fear, but filled with something strange and fragile. Hope. That night, as the wind howled faintly outside, the sisters lay close together by the fire, their glowing line steady and bright. The human sat watch, his heart heavy. He thought of the world beyond his cabin, a world that had no place for them, a world that had turned its back. But he also thought of the promise he had made silently. He would not abandon them. He would not let the ice swallow them again. The younger sister stirred in her sleep, whispering softly, "Don't leave us." Her voice cracked, filled with fear even in dreams. The human's throat tightened. He leaned closer, brushing the blanket over her shoulders. "I won't," he whispered back, though she could not hear. Not ever. When dawn came, the storm had cleared, but the land was still buried. The human opened the cabin door, snow blinding in its brightness. He stood there for a long moment, the cold biting his face. Behind him, the sisters sat up, their eyes wide as they looked out at the endless white. The older one's voice was low, almost a growl. "This world forgot us," she said, "but we will not forget." The human closed the door firmly. Shutting out the cold, he turned to them with steady eyes. "Then let it be," he said. "The world may forget, but we will build something new." The sisters exchanged a look, their glowing lines pulsing brighter for a moment. Perhaps from hope, perhaps from fear, but something inside them shifted. That night, as they sat by the fire, the younger sister asked a question that made the human pause. "Are we family now?" Her voice was timid, trembling, but filled with a desperate hope. The human stared into the fire. Then at their fragile faces he saw their loneliness, their fear, and their courage. He felt the weight of what she had asked. Then he gave the only answer his heart could offer. "Yes," he said softly. "We are family now." The sisters' eyes widened, their glowing lines flickering brightly, and for the first time, a real smile broke across the younger one's face. The older one looked down, hiding her tears, but she did not deny it. Outside, the frozen world stretched on, empty and cruel, but inside the cabin something far stronger than ice had taken root. They had been forgotten by the world, but in the heart of one human, they had been remembered, and in that memory, they found something greater than survival. They found belonging. Days passed, the storm outside faded into memory, but the world beyond the cabin was still buried under endless snow. The human farmer's life had changed forever. Where once his days were filled with silence, now the sound of fragile voices and quiet laughter filled his home. The sisters grew stronger with each sunrise, their glowing lines brighter, their steps steadier, yet their hearts still carried shadows, the kind of scars that no fire could burn away. The human worked tirelessly, splitting wood, melting snow for water, cooking simple meals. He gave them the larger share, eating little himself. When the sisters noticed, they whispered to each other, confused. No one had ever put them first. One evening, as the fire burned low, the younger sister tugged at his sleeve. "Why?" she asked softly, her eyes glowing like tiny stars. "Why give us more when you have less?" The man looked at her, then smiled faintly. "Because that's what family does," he said, his voice steady. "We take care of each other." The words echoed in the cabin. The sisters froze. Family. The word felt foreign, forbidden, yet it warmed them more than the fire. The older sister lowered her gaze, her voice quiet but sharp. "Family cast us out. Family left us to die." Her words carried anger and pain, but also a question hidden beneath. Could this human's promise be different? The farmer's face hardened. "Then they were never family at all," he said. "Family are the ones who stay even when the storm comes." His words cut deep, not as a wound, but as a healing. Silence filled the room. Then slowly, the younger sister leaned against his arm, trembling but not pulling away. The older one stared into the flames, her eyes glistening. From that night on, something changed. The distance between them grew smaller. The fear still lived in their eyes, but trust began to bloom like fragile flowers breaking through ice. The days were not easy. Food was scarce. The storm had buried the land. Hunting was near impossible. The human went out each morning fighting against the cold, returning with little, sometimes nothing. His body grew thinner, but he never let the sisters see his weakness. One evening, the older sister noticed the way his hand shook as he placed the pot on the fire. She frowned. "You are hungry," she said, her voice stern. "You give us food, but you starve." He looked at her, then laughed softly, though his eyes were tired. "As long as you eat, I can manage." The sisters exchanged a look, guilt flickering across their faces. They whispered to each other in their tongue, then split their meal in half. Pushing part of it toward him, he hesitated, but their glowing eyes were firm. This time he accepted, and in that small act, the bond grew stronger. As the nights passed, stories began to fill the silence. The younger sister asked questions about the stars, about the land, about the strange tools he used. The human answered patiently, sometimes smiling, sometimes pausing as old memories rose. The older sister listened quietly, her eyes studying him with care. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words carried weight. One night she said, "You live alone." "Why?" The human stared into the fire, his voice low. "Because people can be cruel," he admitted. "Sometimes it's easier to live in silence than to be betrayed." The sisters looked at him, their faces softening. For the first time they understood. He was not only saving them, he was also saving himself. One night the wind howled again, though weaker than before. The sisters huddled near the fire, the younger one trembling. "The storm will come back," she whispered. Fear clutching her voice, the human knelt beside her, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "Storms always return," he said. "But so does fire." His eyes glowed with determination. "And as long as we keep the fire alive, no storm can take us." The older sister watched, her heart pounding. His words sank deep into her soul. For the first time she believed maybe they were no longer alone. That night, when the younger one finally slept, the older sister whispered softly, "You could have left us, but you didn't. Why risk your life for us?" The human looked at her, his face calm. "Because I saw 2 lives worth saving," he said. "And I couldn't walk away." Her throat tightened. Her glowing eyes shimmered. She turned away quickly, but her heart beat with something new, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Trust. The fire burned steady. The snow still covered the world, but inside that cabin the bond between them grew, not forged by blood, but by fire and ice, by suffering and survival. And though none of them spoke it aloud, each knew deep inside, they were no longer strangers, no longer lost. They were becoming something greater, something stronger. They were becoming a family. The storm had ended. The sky above was clear for the first time in weeks. The snow glittered under the pale sun like endless glass. The world was silent, but not the silence of death anymore. It was the silence after survival. The human stood in the doorway of the cabin, his breath forming clouds in the air. He looked out at the frozen land, his heart heavy. He knew the storm was only one danger. The real question was what came next. Behind him, the sisters stirred, wrapped in blankets but stronger than before. Their glowing lines pulsed bright, no longer faint whispers of life. They had survived. Yet survival was not the end. The younger sister walked unsteadily toward him, her feet bare against the wooden floor. "What now?" she asked, her voice small but clear, her glowing eyes wide with both fear and hope. The human turned to her, his expression softening. He did not answer right away because even he did not know. The world outside had no place for them, and yet inside his cabin they had found more than safety. The older sister joined her, standing straighter, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "We cannot go back, they will not take us. We have no one." Her words cut through the air like a knife, heavy with truth. The human closed the door against the cold. Turning to face them, his voice low but firm. "Then stay here," he said. "This is your home now." The words hung in the air. The fire crackled. The sisters stared at him in silence, as if they could not believe what he had just offered. The younger one's lips trembled, her eyes glistening. "Home," she repeated softly, the word foreign and fragile on her tongue. She looked at her sister, searching her face. The older one's eyes shone with conflict. Trust did not come easily. She had been broken too many times. Yet when she looked at the human, when she saw the raw honesty in his tired face, something inside her melted, her voice broke. Why give us this? Why give us what no one else would? The man's chest rose and fell with a deep breath. He looked from one sister to the other. Because you deserve it, he said. Because no one should be left to die in the cold, and because I don't want to be alone anymore. The word struck them harder than any storm. The younger one gasped, her small hand covering her mouth. The older one's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. Slowly, the younger sister stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his waist, trembling. Then we will stay, she whispered. We will never leave. The man froze for a heartbeat, then placed his rough hands gently on her back, holding her as if she were the most fragile thing in the world. The older sister hesitated, her pride, her fear, her scars all battling inside her, but at last she moved closer, placing her hand on his arm. Her voice low, if this is home, then you are ours. The fire burned brighter as if answering their vow. From that day, the cabin was no longer a lonely shelter in the snow. It became something more. The sound of laughter began to echo in the wooden walls. The warmth of shared meals replaced the silence of hunger, and each night as the fire glowed, the bond between them grew stronger. The human taught them how to split wood, how to light fires, how to mend clothes, and in return, the sisters taught him their songs, their strange tongue, their ways of seeing the stars. The older sister, once so guarded, began to smile faintly when she saw him working. The younger one clung to his arm, her laughter no longer hidden. The world outside had forgotten them, abandoned them, but inside this cabin a new world was born, a world of three souls bound together not by blood, but by choice, by fire, and by love. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, the younger sister whispered, "You saved us," her voice trembling. "But more than that, you gave us a place," the human smiled faintly, brushing ash from his hands. "No," he said gently. "You gave me a place too." The older sister looked at him, her eyes glowing like embers, her voice strong. "Then we belong to each other." The words silenced the cabin, but it was a silence filled with meaning, filled with warmth. The storm had tried to bury them. The world had tried to forget them. But in the heart of one human, they had found everything they needed: safety, love, and home. And as the fire burned against the endless winter, none of them felt the cold anymore, because together they were unbreakable.